Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about The Power of Geography by Tim Marshall. If the cover looks familiar to you, it should because it's one of the sequels to Prisoners of Geography, also by Tim Marshall. And I'll link to the review I did on Prisoners in the description of the video and maybe at the end as well. But one of the things that I really enjoyed about Prisoners, which carries through in this book, is the looking at geopolitical situations not through the eyes of politicians or a particular issue of the day, but through geography. That geography itself has a role to play in how nation states uh, relate to each other. Now, there's 10 chapters in this book, as there were, I think, 10 in Prisoners as well. I do think Prisoners was a stronger book than this one, but this still, I think, adds a lot of value. The chapters are Australia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, the UK, Greece, Turkey, the Sahel, Ethiopia, Spain, and space. So I think probably our weakest chapters here are the Spanish chapter and the United Kingdom chapter. And for me, the strongest ones, Greece, Turkey, and Ethiopia, but maybe because I continue to be interested in the issues around those countries. Now, the place that I visited this summer, in which Greece and Turkey are directly confronted, or rather not this summer, a little earlier this year, around May, is Cyprus. Now, for those who don't know, Cyprus is divided into something called the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, which is only recognized by one country in the world, Turkey, and the southern part of Cyprus, which is known as Cyprus, but is an EU member state, which means you have an EU member state that continues to have a unresolved military occupation. So if you think about the issues of Greece and Turkey, Cyprus somehow brings that into focus. And Marshall alludes to this. If you'd like to know more about the Cypriot problem, the person I think is most reliable on YouTube to learn more about this is Professor James Ker-Lindsay. I'll link to his videos on Cyprus in the description, as well as a book that he recently released, which I'm about halfway through now, which is an excellent summary of the challenges of this problem. And when I was in Cyprus and I had a chance to also travel to the Turkish side, I think we see the same problem here that we do in all of these border situations is there's not a straightforward solution. And part of the challenge with Cyprus is the same challenge that falls to the Greeks and the Turks respectively, which is how do they reconcile the historical conception of who they are as a people and as a nation with the current state of the world. And you have with that treaties that are much older. So with Greece and Turkey, you have the Treaty of Lausanne, and then later an armistice that came from that, which led to the creation of the modern Turkish state as we know of. So the Greece idea of a larger sphere of influence is known as the Megali idea, and this relates to if you can think of this older, larger Byzantine Empire view of the world. So let's say the Balkans and Anatolia, where what we have is modern day Turkey. The Turks also have their own conception, which relates to the Ottoman Empire called the Blue Homeland. And it also, obviously, these are Venn diagrams that directly contradict each other. Greece has a historical narrative, so do the Turks. And if you want to pause the video for a moment and just go and take a look at a map of Greece and Turkey and just zoom in and realize part of the favorable treaty that Greece got was that all of those islands that are right off of the coast of Turkey are considered Greek by international law. And obviously the Turks have some grievance about this, that, why are these islands, which are effectively right on our coast, considered Greek when they were, let's say, Ottoman for many centuries as well. So as much as Turkey would say that they're not exactly the successor of the Ottoman Empire, they are the closest successor to the Ottoman Empire. And this historical conflict now plays in present day, both particularly with President Erdogan, but you have it play out in ridiculous scenarios. For example, the most recently ridiculous, and this is not even recent, it was a few years ago now, but Turkey bought some S-400 missile defense surface to air missile defense systems, which those are Russian, and those defense systems are ostensibly created to shoot down the Joint Strike Fighter, which is a NATO bird, which the Turks have because they're allies of NATO. They're a member of NATO, actually. So Greece and Turkey are are allies technically in the NATO alliance, but Turkey very much, it seems, reserves the right to carve its own path. It's continuing to make claims to islands off of the coast of Greece and other areas in order for energy exploration, understandably, and that's bringing them into conflict. They also are in control of the Bosphorus, which bottles up the Russian fleet in the Black Sea if they want to get out. And so Turkey is a very pivotal member, not just of NATO. They're on the doorstep of the EU. Their application to the EU has been stalled for many years for historical reasons. I'm certain that's probably enough. But we've had it also wrapped up in the migrant crisis, that this is where a lot of people, and when I say migrants, obviously there are some honest refugees coming from war, which since the West started, I've said the West can accept the refugees from the wars that they've started, so they can take them. But the rest, among those so-called refugees, we don't have refugees. We have people who want to cause problems, and they're filtering through as well. Well, Turkey is this doorstep, then they go to Greece, and then they come into Europe. So even though it may not be on the radar of many people, the conflict between Turkey and Greece is something that people should look into, and I think the book does a good job of looking into that. And I, as I say, take a deeper look. The other one, which I found really fascinating, which I think is worth reading the book alone for, is Ethiopia. And I didn't know this because I wasn't familiar with how the geography is in this part of Africa. But people don't realize the Nile flows into the Mediterranean, but it flows all the way from Ethiopia through Sudan. And so if we think about it, this is a real danger for the Egyptians. So 95% of Egypt's population lives along the Nile. And they estimate, their numbers are that if even 10% of the water coming from the Nile now were to be held back, something like 5 million farmers would be out of work and half of their agricultural production would go away. So this water issue is an existential threat for Egypt. Now, they believe that they get a certain water quota from a 1929, I think, Anglo-Egyptian treaty, but Ethiopia was not a signatory to this treaty. So Ethiopia, as the upstream nation, they really control all the power. And in this case, it's hydroelectric power. So there is something called the GERD, which is GERD, and this is the giant dam that they're building in Ethiopia. And this hydroelectric dam is not only going to be enough to generate cheap, reliable electricity for the 110 million people, I think, who live in Ethiopia, which is the second most populous country on the continent. But they're going to have so much energy, they're going to be able to sell to Sudan as well. And what that will do for economic development opportunities in those countries is untold. The argument is, well, how can you cut off Egypt? We're downstream, we're vulnerable. And I think that's a tough question, is it not? That if you have the ability to control water to take care of your population, do you have any responsibility downstream? We've seen this in the United States as well with the Colorado River, which is taken from all these different states that are along the Colorado River, and they take water not only for their farmers, but they're able to generate some economic development from that. And at this point, sometimes the Colorado River doesn't even finish flowing all the way down into the Gulf that it empties into. So I don't think there's a straightforward answer to that. Ethiopia, for its part, is pretty well insulated. If Egypt were to try to threaten some sort of military advance, they'd have to come down through the Gulf against allies of Ethiopia, or they'd have to attack through Sudan, which wouldn't be very welcome either. Even if they sent their jets on a suicide mission to face the Israeli paid for missile defense system that the Ethiopians have, they wouldn't have enough they don't have enough range to get home. So they could try to bomb the dam. They could risk of flooding in Sudan as a result of that. And even if the missiles were to get past the Israeli systems, they wouldn't have enough to fly home. So it'd be a suicide mission potentially. So the Egyptians are in a really tough place. And the Ethiopians, understandably, are saying, we don't have any obligation to Egypt. We don't have any obligation to a treaty that we didn't sign. And yet, we might also understand as humans, we have compassion one towards another. And the idea that you're at the end of this river that I'm at the beginning of, that there needs to be some sort of solution that potentially is equitable. Uh, there's not a legal obligation that Ethiopia has, but one might say that there's a moral obligation that Ethiopia should consider, even considering the testy history between these two nations. In any case, as I hope I've conveyed here, these two situations, Greece and Turkey and Ethiopia and Egypt, are anything but straightforward. And I hope it inspires you, as it has inspired me, to do further reading, to understand the situation better, not because an easy solution will come about, but because it will help me understand, I think, in some ways, how very privileged you might be to live in a place in which the borders are settled, in which there is some kind of internal security, in which you're not wondering whether a bordering nation state is going to make a economic development decision which may affect your access to water. I mean, these are real problems that everyone else in the world faces that many of us are insulated from. So I think it's worth looking into and knowing more about. As always, if you want to support this channel, please hit like, subscribe, potentially join the Patreon if you'd like to support my work more. There's an Amazon wish list so that you can purchase a book, have it sent to me, and I might be able to do a review of it. Can't always promise that I'll be able to, as I'm getting more and more requests to do different books. And if there's other books in this style that Tim Marshall puts out, please feel free to put that in the comments. I think other people who are watching the video would like to know. I would also like to know, because it's helpful to get just an introduction to these different issues, so that we can have a better chance of not fully understanding, but shall we say begin to understand. Until next time, enjoy your reading.